Some families don't just have a history, they are history. Across 1,000 years, a handful of Irish families rose to extraordinary power, ruling kingdoms, defeating Viking armies, founding global empires, electing presidents, and shaping the modern world in ways most people have completely forgotten. Some of them were destroyed by English conquest and scattered to the four corners of the earth. Some of them built fortunes so vast they changed entire countries, and then watched their Irish origins get quietly erased from the story. The family that produced the most famous American president of the 20th century came from a tiny village in County Wexford. The family behind one of the most recognizable brands on the planet campaigned against the independence of the very country they claimed to love. And the family that gave America the automobile came from a famine cottage in County Cork. These are 10 Irish families that changed the world and were erased from the story. And number one is so powerful that their name is still spoken in boardrooms, ballot boxes, and bars in every corner of the globe. This is Dust and Stories. Subscribe, because behind every great family is a story someone tried to bury. Number 10, the O'Conors. We'll start with one of the last great Gaelic dynasties to hold the High Kingship of Ireland. The O'Conors Conchobar ruled the Kingdom of Connacht in the west of Ireland for nearly 500 years. They produced the last two High Kings of Ireland before the Norman invasion. Turlough O'Conor ruled as High King for over 30 years in the 12th century and was one of the most powerful men in Irish history. He built bridges, commissioned the Cross of Cong, and dominated the island. His son, Rory O'Conor, had the terrible distinction of being the last native High King of Ireland. It was during Rory's reign, in 1169, that the Normans invaded and the independent Gaelic order began its long collapse. The O'Conors were never the same. Their power fractured into competing branches: the O'Conor Don, the O'Conor Roe, the O'Conor Sligo, each fighting the others. The dynasty that had ruled the west of Ireland for half a millennium was reduced to squabbling lords. The family still exists today. There is still an O'Conor Don. But the kingdom is gone, and almost nobody remembers they were once the kings of Ireland. Number 9, the McCarthys. In the south of Ireland, in the kingdom of Desmond covering what is now Cork and Kerry, the McCarthys ruled for centuries. McCarthy. They were the great rivals of the O'Briens and one of the most powerful families in Munster. They built castles, patronized poets, and resisted English expansion for generations. They built Blarney Castle and the famous Blarney Stone, which millions of tourists still kiss every year in the hope of receiving the gift of eloquence, sits in a castle built by the McCarthy clan. The word Blarney itself, meaning smooth, flattering talk, comes from the McCarthy Lord Cormac McCarthy, who reportedly frustrated Queen Elizabeth I with so many charming excuses and delays that she exclaimed his promises were all Blarney. The family was eventually broken by the English conquest of Munster. Their lands were confiscated. Their power was destroyed. But every single day, tourists climb the walls of a McCarthy castle to kiss a stone and use a word that came from a McCarthy lord's silver tongue without ever knowing the family that gave them both. Number 8, the Kavanaghs. Here's a family whose most famous member committed what many Irish people consider the single most catastrophic act of betrayal in Irish history. The MacMurrough Kavanaghs were the kings of Leinster in the east of Ireland, and in 1166, the king of Leinster, Diarmait MacMurchada, Dermot MacMurrough, was driven out of Ireland by his rivals. Rather than accept defeat, he sailed to England and asked King Henry II for help. He invited the Normans into Ireland. He offered them land and his daughter's hand in marriage in exchange for military support. The Normans came. They never left. Dermot MacMurrough is remembered in Ireland as the man who sold his country to the invaders, the trigger for 800 years of English involvement in Ireland. The Kavanaghs continued as a powerful Leinster family for centuries afterward. But the name carries a weight that few family names anywhere in the world carry, the family that, rightly or wrongly, gets blamed for letting the conqueror in the door. Number 7, the O'Briens. The O'Briens descend from the single most famous Irishman who ever lived, Brian Boru, the High King who united Ireland and broke the power of the Vikings at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, dying in the hour of his victory. His descendants took his name Brian and ruled the kingdom of Thomond, covering Clare and Limerick, for centuries. The O'Briens were one of the few Gaelic families clever enough to survive the English conquest by adapting to it. When the old Gaelic order collapsed, the O'Briens surrendered their kingship to the English crown and were granted the title Earl of Thomond in return. They kept their lands, they kept their wealth, they survived where other families were destroyed, but the price was steep. The descendants of the man who saved Ireland from foreign domination became English aristocrats, sitting in the English Parliament, holding English titles. The family of Brian Boru is still around today, but the high kingship he died for was traded away for an earldom. Number 6. The O'Neills. The O'Neills of Ulster were arguably the most powerful Gaelic dynasty in all of Irish history. Nil. They claimed descent from Niall of the Nine Hostages, the legendary 5th century High King. For over 1,000 years, they dominated the north of Ireland. Their greatest figure, Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, led the last great Gaelic resistance against the English in the 9 Years' War at the end of the 16th century. He came within a hair's breadth of driving the English out of Ireland entirely. He was defeated at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. And in 1607, in an event known as the Flight of the Earls, Hugh O'Neill and the other great Gaelic lords of Ulster boarded a ship and fled Ireland forever, scattering into exile across Catholic Europe. The Flight of the Earls is one of the most important moments in Irish history, the end of the Gaelic aristocracy, the event that opened Ulster to the plantation, the colonization that created the divisions still visible in Northern Ireland today. The O'Neills ruled the north for 1,000 years. They lost it in a single generation, and their descendants are scattered across Spain, Portugal, and Latin America, carrying a name that once meant king. If your surname is anywhere on this list, you might want to hit subscribe right now, because the next 5 families built the modern world. Number 5. The Fitzgeralds. The Fitzgeralds were not originally Irish at all. They were Norman, arriving in the 12th century. But they became, in the famous phrase, more Irish than the Irish themselves. They adopted the Irish language, Irish customs, Irish dress, and Irish poetry. And they became one of the most powerful aristocratic families in Ireland for 400 years, the Earls of Kildare and the Earls of Desmond. At their peak, the Fitzgeralds effectively ruled Ireland on behalf of the English crown. But they grew so powerful and so Irish that the crown came to see them as a threat. In 1534, Silken Thomas Fitzgerald renounced his allegiance to Henry VIII and led a rebellion. It was crushed. Thomas and 5 of his uncles were executed at Tyburn in London. The House of Kildare was shattered. The family survived there are still Fitzgeralds, and the name traveled to America, where a descendant named Rose Fitzgerald would marry a man named Joseph Kennedy and give birth to a future president. The Norman family that became more Irish than the Irish ended up 4 centuries later in the bloodline of the most famous Irish-American family in history. Number 4. The Fords. In a small cottage in the townland of Ballinascardy, County Cork, a family of tenant farmers struggled through the years before the famine. When the blight came, William Ford took his family and emigrated to America, settling in Michigan. His son, born just after they arrived, was named Henry. Henry Ford grew up to invent the moving assembly line, found the Ford Motor Company, produced the Model T, and put the world on wheels. He was arguably the single most influential industrialist of the 20th century, the man who created mass production, the modern factory, and the affordable automobile. He changed how the entire world works, travels, and lives. And he came from a family of Irish famine immigrants from County Cork. Henry Ford never forgot it. In 1917, he built a massive Ford factory in Cork, on the very land his family had come from, partly out of sentiment for his Irish roots. The man who motorized the planet was the son of a Cork famine emigrant. Most people think of Henry Ford as quintessentially American. His family was Irish, driven out by hunger, like a million others. Number 3. The Guinnesses. The Guinness family is one of the strangest and most contradictory dynasties on this list. Arthur Guinness founded his brewery at St. James's Gate in Dublin in 1759, and his family built it into one of the most valuable companies and recognizable brands on earth. The Guinnesses became fabulously wealthy, and they used that wealth to reshape Dublin. They restored St. Patrick's Cathedral, they built public parks, they funded housing for the poor. They were for 2 centuries one of the most powerful families in Ireland. But here's the contradiction. The Guinness family, despite building their fortune on an Irish product and an Irish identity that they sold to the world, were Unionists. They opposed Irish independence and supported continued union with Britain. The family that sells Irishness to the world in every pub on the planet campaigned against the independence of Ireland itself. The dynasty was also haunted by what became known as the Guinness curse, a long series of tragedies, early deaths, and scandals across the generations. The beer is the most famous Irish product in the world. The family behind it is far less known and far more complicated than the cheerful pint suggests. Number 2. The Joyces. The Joyces are a genuine ancient Irish clan, one of the tribes of Galway, a family of Welsh-Norman origin that settled in Connacht in the 13th century and gave their name to an entire region, Joyce Country, in the mountains of Galway and Mayo. But the family's most famous son changed world literature forever. James Joyce, born in Dublin in 1882, wrote Ulysses, a novel routinely described as the greatest and most important work of fiction of the 20th century. He wrote Dubliners, a portrait of the artist as a young man, and Finnegan's Wake. He reinvented the novel. He pioneered the stream of consciousness technique. He influenced virtually every serious writer who came after him. And he did it all while living in exile in Trieste, in Paris, in Zurich, having left an Ireland he found suffocating, while writing about almost nothing but Ireland for the rest of his life. James Joyce mapped the city of Dublin so precisely in Ulysses that he claimed it could be rebuilt from his book. The family name comes from a medieval clan that gave its name to a corner of the west of Ireland. The man carried it to the summit of world literature. Number 1. The Kennedys. And finally, the most famous Irish family in the history of the world. The Kennedys. The story begins in Dunganstown, a small village in County Wexford in the 1840s. Patrick Kennedy was a farmer and Cooper a barrel maker. When the famine struck, he did what a million others did. He boarded a ship and sailed to America, arriving in Boston in 1849. He had nothing. He died young, of cholera, leaving a widow and children in the slums of East Boston. It should have been the end of the story, another anonymous Irish famine family swallowed by the American city. It wasn't. Patrick's son became a saloon owner and local politician. His grandson, Joseph Kennedy, became one of the richest men in America. And his great-grandson, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, became the 35th President of the United States, the first Catholic president, the youngest elected president, and one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century. The Kennedys became an American dynasty, senators, attorneys general, ambassadors, congressmen, marked by extraordinary achievement and extraordinary tragedy. 3 of the brothers met violent or untimely ends. The Kennedy curse became part of American folklore. But it all began in a cottage in County Wexford, with a barrel maker who lost everything to the famine and sailed west with nothing. 4 generations later, his descendants stood in front of the world as the most powerful man on earth. And in 1963, just months before his death, President John F. Kennedy returned to that cottage in Dunganstown. He stood among his Irish cousins on the land his great-grandfather had fled in desperation, and he wept. The most powerful family in the modern world came from a famine cottage in Wexford, and almost nobody remembers the barrel maker who started it all. 10 families, the O'Connors and the O'Neills and the McCarthys, who ruled Ireland for 1,000 years and lost it all to conquest. The Fitzgeralds, who became more Irish than the Irish. The Fords, who motorized the world. The Guinnesses, who sold Irishness while opposing Irish freedom. The Joyces, who reinvented literature. And the Kennedys, who went from a famine cottage to the White House. Some of these families were erased by the sword. Some had their Irish origins quietly forgotten. But every one of them changed the world, and every one of them began on the same small island at the edge of Europe. If your family name is on this list, or if this video showed you a story you'd never heard, subscribe to Dust and Stories. We trace the bloodlines, the dynasties, and the families that shaped the world and were written out of the story. Like the video. Drop a comment telling us your family name and where it comes from. And thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.